publications. The actual death toll of former KMT government officials was over 5 million. During the CCP's land reform, the death toll was about 10 million. During the suppression of the reactionaries and the land reform, the CCP killed all the management personnel from the previous system and realized complete control of rural areas by installing a party branch in every village. A huge amount of wealth was obtained by stealing and robbing during the two campaigns. The third result was that the civilians were all terrorized. The suppression of reactionaries and the land reform mainly targeted the countryside, while the subsequent 3 anti and 5 anti campaign could be regarded as the corresponding genocide in the cities. In the 3 anti movement, a batch of the CCP's corrupt cadres was executed, while the 5 anti campaign was essentially murdering the capitalists for their money. The capitalists were required to pay taxes that the CCP accused them of having evaded in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They could not possibly afford to pay these so-called taxes. They had no other choice but jumped from tall buildings, leaving a corpse so that the CCP could see proof of their death. Chen Yi, the mayor of Shanghai at that time, was briefed every night while lounging on his sofa with a cup of tea in hand. He would ask, how many paratroopers were there today? Meaning, how many businessmen jumped out of high buildings to commit suicide today? None of the capitalists could escape the 5 anti campaign. It was said that at that time, people didn't dare to walk next to tall buildings in Shanghai in fear of being crushed by people jumping from above. Since the CCP took power, the highest and most miserable death toll was recorded during China's Great Famine from 1959 to 1961. At least 30 million people starved to death. The Great Famine was falsely labeled by the CCP as a 3-year natural disaster. In fact, those 3 years had favorable weather conditions and didn't have any huge natural disasters. The disaster was caused entirely by man. The Great Leap Forward campaign required everyone in China to become involved in steelmaking, forcing farmers to leave their crops to rot in the fields. Officials in every region escalated their reports of production yields. Rice yields of over 3,000 tons per acre were boasted. Consequently, the grain rations, seeds, and staple foods of the peasants were all confiscated as a form of taxation according to these exaggerated yields. He Yiran, first secretary of the party committee of Liuzhou Prefecture, said that the Liuzhou area must strive to get first place in the competition for highest yield, no matter how many local people would die as a result. In some areas, the government even issued orders forbidding cooking to thereby prevent the peasants from eating their crops. Many peasants did not even dare to cook the food they found growing in the wild and died of starvation. In the book Historical Records of the People's Republic of China, published in 1994, it states the number of unnatural deaths and reduced births from 1959 to 1961 is estimated at about 40 million. This is likely to be the world's greatest famine in this century. In this report, unnatural deaths and reduced birth population actually represents the number of people starved to death. Historically, in times of famine, the government would provide rice porridge. They would distribute the crops and allow victims to flee from famine-stricken areas. The CCP, however, regarded fleeing from the famine as a disgrace to the party's prestige and ordered militiamen to block roadways to prevent the victims from escaping the famine. When the peasants were so hungry as to snatch grain from grain depots, the CCP ordered shooting at the crowd and labeled those killed as counter-revolutionary elements. A great number of peasants were starved to death in many provinces, including Gansu, Shandong, Henan, Anhui, and Guangxi. The hungry peasants were forced to take part in irrigation work and steel making. Many dropped to the ground while working, and never got up again. At the end, those who survived had no strength to bury the dead. Many villages died out completely. In the most serious famines in China's history prior to the CCP, there were cases in which families exchanged one another's children to eat, but nobody ever ate his own children. Under the CCP reign, however, people were driven to eat those who died, cannibalize those who fled from other regions, and even kill and eat their own children. The writer Sha Qing depicted this scene in a book, An Obscure Land of Bayou. In a peasant's family, a father was left with only his son and daughter during the Great Famine. One day, the daughter was driven out of the house by her father. When she came back, she could not find her younger brother, but saw white oil floating in the cauldron and a pile of bones next to the stove. Several days later, the father added more water to the pot and called his daughter to come closer. The girl was frightened and pleaded with her father from outside the door. "Daddy, please don't eat me. I can collect firewood and cook food for you. If you eat me, nobody else will do this for you." The final extent and number of tragedies like this is unknown. But we do know that the CCP cadres at different levels, the ones directly responsible for these tragedies, had resisted telling the truth in the face of tens of millions starving to death. As a result, they passed the CCP's test. After the Great Famine, the responsible provincial officials merely participated in the formality of self-criticism. Li Jinchuan, the CCP secretary for Sichuan province, where millions of people died from starvation, was promoted. Yet the CCP misrepresented these people as being worthy of noble honor, claiming that the CCP was leading people to bravely fight the natural disasters and continued to tout itself as great, glorious, and correct. Everything the CCP does serves only one purpose: gaining and maintaining power. Killing is a very important way for the CCP to maintain its power. The more people killed and the crueler the killings, the greater the ability to terrify. In his book, The Enemy Within, Father Raymond J. de Jager relates the killing stories he witnessed in North China during the Sino-Japanese War. One day, the CCP required everyone to go to the square in the village. Teachers led the children to the square from school to watch the killing of 13 patriotic young men. After announcing the fabricated charges against the victims, the CCP ordered the horrified teacher to lead the children to sing patriotic songs while gesturing the executioner to begin. The executioner was a fierce, robust young communist soldier with strong arms. The soldier went behind the first victim, quickly raised a big sharp knife, and struck downwards, and the first head fell to the ground. Blood sprayed out like a fountain as the head rolled on the ground. The children's hysterical singing turned into chaotic screaming and crying. The teacher kept the beat, trying to keep the songs going. The executioner chopped 13 times, and 13 heads fell to the ground. After that, many communist soldiers came over, cut open the victims' chests, and took out their hearts for a feast. All the brutality was done in front of the children. The children went all pale due to the terror, and some started throwing up. The teachers scolded them and lined the children up to return to school. After that, Father de Jager often saw children being forced to watch killings. The children became used to the bloody scenes and numb to the killing. Some even started to enjoy the excitement. When the CCP felt that simple killing was not horrifying and exciting enough, they invented all kinds of cruel tortures. For example, forcing someone to swallow a large amount of salt without letting him drink any water. The victim would suffer until he died of thirst. Or stripping someone naked and forcing him to roll on broken glass. Or cutting a hole in the frozen river in the winter and throwing the victim into the hole. The victim would either freeze to death or drown. Father de Jager's book also told stories like the following one.